Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications, and today I am joined by our repeat co-host, Kelly Saunders. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Always a pleasure to be with you. Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBAM. Last week, I was playing Sarah's role, and today I will be filling in for Brian. So I kind of feel like the ping pong ball, but always happy to be here.
Well, thanks for pitch hitting for me last week and for being here today. All right, I do want to say welcome to one of our new members. This is one of our elite members, Craft Business Systems, and they are managed IT software services and copier printer experts out of Grand Rapids. So welcome to the Craft Business Systems team, and thank you for becoming an elite member. All right, so Kelly, I feel like whenever we're on a show together, we talk politics. So let's start with the events of the week, starting with the DNC gathering in Chicago.
Yeah, so Midwest, obviously very popular for these national conventions. The Republicans, as you recall, had their national convention in Milwaukee about a month ago now. And now the Democrats come together and they will be in Chicago at the United Center this week, where Vice President Harris will bring her respective folks together and put on essentially their show for this week, bringing everyone together, unifying. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what that might look like. There's interesting, takes on, what kind of convention will the Democrats put forth. By all intents and purposes, the Republican one seemed to gain a lot of credibility by how well it was run and the folks that they had speak. And the Democrats will really seek to do the same thing this week. Obviously, with all the drama, I'll say, with President Biden, not continuing his bid for a reelection, and then Vice President Harris stepping in. If you recall, we talked about the delegate process and how he had secured those delegates through obviously the primary, um, you know, uh, uh, journey, if you will. She had to essentially get on the phone and call these delegates and retain them herself. And they did that through a virtual call. And now they all come together essentially to certify those results and put her forth. And so the main focus of what are the Democrats going to talk about this week? And there was a very interesting perspective that was given about how when Vice President Harris picked Governor Walz to be her running mate, they were expecting her to pick somebody that was a little bit more middle of the road. As we know, Vice President Harris has not really run into the middle of the road. She's, tends to be a little more left leaning than most. And Governor Walz tends to actually be in that lane as well and doesn't run middle of the road. We know Minnesota is in the bag. It's been blue for many years. And so what does he bring to the table? The Democrats this week will probably focus in on a demographic of folks that they have lost to Trump in the past, which is the white working men in unions that they feel like they can gain back. Waltz does bring that to the ticket. While he may be more left leaning, what they're seeking to do is put him stage front because he's a veteran from a farming community. He's a school teacher and a former football coach, and he is a solid union person. And so while Trump in the past, if you recall, in elections before, took 59% of the non-college educated white men in 2020 and 62% in 2016, Democrats really have their eye on that voting bloc because they see them as Trump leaning but not Trump committed. And so when we watch the DNC this week, you're probably going to see themes of that trying to bring that voting bloc back to their party to push her over the finish line essentially in November. And that's what Governor Walz, they think, brings to the table. And so one thing that the DNC did say this week is that they're really going to scale back on having the Hollywood figures that they normally would have had on the stage and really trying to make it relatable essentially to the normal working American. And so you'll see a lot of patriotism, they said, throughout this week. And that does kind of mirror what the Republicans did back about a month ago. And so we may see some similarities in how they present this week, as I think Nolan Finley said this past week in the press. It's the reinvention convention for the Democrats. As maybe, Harris is trying to say, I may have had a record back then of doing this, but I recognize that we have to bring it back and make it more about working people. Does that resonate with the public? We're going to find out. But at the end of the day, what people did ask for was somebody else different on the ticket than a Trump Biden ticket. And now they get the Harris Trump matchup. And so it's going to be a really interesting week to watch how this messaging goes down. But that's kind of what they're aiming to do, is to bring white men, working white men, back into the fold on their side to push them over the finish line.
All right. And now Harris is going to be in Chicago, like you said, but Trump is going to be here in mid-Michigan and Howell. So what's that visit supposed to be like?
Yeah, so JD Vance was actually in West Michigan last week, and we said that, these candidates are going to be in Michigan nonstop leading up to November. And now former President Trump will be in Howell this week on Tuesday. So again, that Midwestern presence, right? And Michigan is becoming even more important and more viable to both of these candidates. Vice President Harris was here, I think, a little over a week and a half ago in Detroit. And so, again, we tell you this because mainly if you're traveling through these different spots and you see a lot of police presence, or you can't get somewhere and it's not because of construction, it's probably because we have national figures here in Michigan holding rallies and bringing people together to hopefully rally them to vote for themselves as we approach November. So yes, while the Democrats are in Chicago, former President Trump again will be in Howell tomorrow. And we will continue to keep you updated on where all of these figures are as we lead up into November.
Right, absolutely. We'll be watching this week, and we'll have some more news on the show next Monday. But one more thing within these two campaigns, Kelly, they both did release their economic agendas last week. So what were some of the highlights?
Sure. And so we saw these competing economic plans unveiled, and I'll use the term plans a little bit lightly, more talking points, if you will. So President Trump, former President Trump, has stuck, to his main talking points, like he has when he ran for office, the first and second time, touting that he's going to expand oil production to drive down energy prices, cut regulations and taxes, reclaim unspent federal Inflation Reduction Act grants, move supply chains back to the United States, and end mandates on electric vehicle, production. But the thing is he's not talking about what people want to talk about, which is reducing the debt. And so there was no talk of like government spending in his plans. While they're all high level talking points, he doesn't really get granular about how he's going to do those things. And so some people are skeptical. Well, the talking points are certainly valid and it's what people want to work on. What are the details? How are you going to do these things? And likewise, Vice President Harris did release her economic plans last week, which honestly made some people really nervous. She talked about a plan to address food inflation by imposing price fixes on grocery stores. She also did accuse supermarket chains of price gouging. Um, and so, that does make people start to get really nervous about how that works. Just for context purposes, prices of groceries and everything else has surged largely, mainly what we've talked about from COVID-19, where everything got shut down and then our supply chains got all out of whack. And so everything became backed up. And so that we're still feeling the effects of that a little bit. And so, in the grocery industry in 2023, they only posted a profit margin of 1.6%. So I'm going to say it again, the grocery industry only retained a profit of 1.6%. So if they're price gouging, they're not doing a very good job of it. If you really, dig down into the details. So when you start to talk about price fixes on grocery chains, the Soviet Union did this and it led to hunger. And so, we don't necessarily know like the details of what she's necessarily talking about in this space, or we hope we don't. But that really did kind of rub people the wrong way. And what do you mean by that? And so, again, high level talking points, but not a lot of detail. And then also in her plan, promising $25,000 to help first time home buyers with their down payments and middle class tax cuts, which does make people worried about the deficit because all these things drive up the inflationary costs as well. And so while we talk about spending, we really do have to talk about the deficit. And so, anyway, as we look at these two competing economic plans, what are the details behind them and what are the plans to put those in place? Because they both, again, probably have merit, but it's getting a little nerve-wracking on the plans that are being put forth because there's no plan. It's just talking points. So hopefully those campaigns will come to the forefront with more detail as we approach November.
All right, let's switch to some news here in Michigan related to the Michigan Supreme Court races. There were some numbers recently released. So, Kelly, what's going on there?
Right. So, a reminder on the Michigan Supreme Court. We don't always talk about these races. We obviously talked about the Michigan Supreme Court quite a bit in the last couple of weeks with the ruling that came down on what we call adopt and amend. But judges are actually put forth by political parties through a convention process here in Michigan. So, the Republicans will get together this Saturday to put forth their respective candidates for the Michigan Supreme Court, and the Democrats will do the same, I believe, in a week or two. And so, but the judges in the meantime, like they are, they're raising money essentially to run for office. So the numbers that came out in the recent campaign filing reporting, if you recall, Justice Kira Bolden sits on the Michigan Supreme Court. She reported raising 1.1 million this year as of August 8th. That's a very heavy haul. And then there's also another candidate, University of Michigan Law School professor Kimberly Ann Thomas, who will be running on the Democratic side. She raised $826,000. Those are pretty high numbers for a Supreme Court race. To put this in perspective, on the Republican side, Kimberly Ann Thomas, who's running, her number of raising dollars was 10 times that of any of the 5 candidates running on the Republican side. And so we can see that the Democrats are very intent on keeping the Michigan Supreme Court. Among those running on the Republican side, Branch County Judge Patrick William O'Grady's campaign, $21,000. Romulus lawyer Alexandria Taylor, $8,000, and former Attorney General candidate Matt DePerno raised $136. And so when we're seeing these types of numbers that would be going up against Justice Bolden, that's a pretty heavy gap to close. And then of those running against the proposed candidate Kimberly Ann Thomas, by the justice that's departing from the Supreme Court, Justice Viviano, who's not seeking reelection. Representative Andrew Fink, who is from Southwest Michigan, raised $81,000. And then Michigan Court of Appeals Judge Mark Boonstra raised $35,000. So these are some pretty interesting numbers to watch early. Now, once the convention process ends, there will be other dollars that flow in from other entities to support these respective candidates, but the Democrats are definitely at an advantage when it comes to the money in the Michigan Supreme Court races.
All right, let's move to the federal front, Kelly, with our US Senate race here in Michigan. And then there's a couple of congressional races we're watching closely here in Lansing area and then over in the Oakland-Macomb region. So give us an update.
Sure. So Brian and I went over the primary and how we did in our engagement, but he gave a pretty high level overview of the federal races. If you recall, current Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin and former Congressman Mike Rogers will go against each other in November, and let the battle begin. The minute after this race was decided, I'm sure you've seen on TV or on streaming that there are a number of ads that have already hit the airwaves going after Congresswoman Slotkin and in turn former Congressman Mike Rogers. On the political front, on the Republican side, there's 1.3 million on air in the next 2 weeks in the Detroit market against Congresswoman Slotkin by a conservative PAC who's did boost Mike Rogers $5 million to get him through the primary. And then, obviously there's been an unknown amount of money that has been put up against former Congressman Mike Rogers. So this is already getting very heated. If you've seen some of the ads, it's pretty pointed. And so I would say just buckle up because that race is going to be really, really hot. On some of the congressional races that you mentioned, Sarah, here in Lansing, we've talked about former State Senator Curtis Hertel, who also worked for the governor, running, and he put up his first ad on TV this past Friday. He's running against former State Senator Republican Tom Barrett. And this race was actually added to the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee's what they call red to blue campaign. He's been on their radar now since the beginning of May, I believe. And so they are really putting their time and effort in trying to retain that seat, which is being vacated by Congresswoman Slotkin. And then in the Oakland-Macomb seat, Brian previewed that one last week as well. That's where Congressman John James is. And he will be facing up against Cara Malinga that he did the last time. The reason why this run is interesting is because Cara Malinga did not have a lot of support from the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee. Actually, he had zero support from them last time. And John James only won that seat by 1,600 votes. He was also outspent 8-1, Cara Malinga was, in that district. So they really feel like they can flip that seat. John James did raise almost $4 million this past year to support his efforts. And right now, Cara Malinga only has $100,000 in his bank account as of reporting. So that is a really interesting one to watch, as Brian stated last week when he was on. But being added to this red to blue campaign is really going to make a difference for him. It'll be one to watch. And then finally, in the 8th district, where Congressman Kildee is not running for re-election, Kristen McDonald-Rivet, state senator here, did win that seat. She's also been added to this red to blue campaign. Even though it's blue, she's basically in this campaign to retain that seat. And that seat was added to this campaign in May as she was going to be the perceived candidate. So again, Michigan is really on the national forefront of those races to watch. And these are popping up now as a main highlight and a main focus of the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee. And so please expect your airwaves to be flooded in the next couple months on those 3 races specifically.
All right, thanks for the update there, Kelly. Next on our list today is some news about actually various Enbridge lawsuits. What happened?
Yes, so there's basically 3 lawsuits out there with Enbridge. Unfortunately, this past week in the Nestle versus Enbridge case, a federal appellate court declined to hear Enbridge Energy's petition for a hearing challenging a ruling on the Attorney General's lawsuit to shutter Line 5, and it will be returned to state court. So we don't necessarily know what the next steps are other than it being sent back to the state courts. If you recall, the company Enbridge does operate obviously the Straits of Mackinac pipeline. It's an essential energy producer to Canada, and then obviously the UP specifically. Enbridge asserted that the line was protected by a 1977 treaty between the United States and Canada. And that's the ruling that's being challenged by the Attorney General based on there was essentially an anchor that hit the pipeline and had some issues, which is why we have supported encasing the pipeline and making sure that it is safe. And Enbridge is really trying to do right by that. So this case will be returned to the state court. We will watch it. The one that we've reported on most is the Enbridge versus Whitmer case, but this is one that was still hanging out there. So the Attorney General is, claiming a little bit of victory right now in this case. We'll see where it goes from here, but we really do hope that our friends at Enbridge are successful in these, because we know what an energy producer, and an important energy producer this company is, not only for Canada, but also for here at home in Michigan. So, Sarah, I'm going to take a breather and let you talk about a very important press release that was came out of our shop today to talk about our SBAM quarterly survey. Can you give us some highlights on what we learned from our members?
I sure can, Kelly. Thank you. Yes, SBAM conducts quarterly surveys of our members, and I did just drop the link to the press release here in the chat on Zoom and in the comments on Facebook. And I think the results are really quite telling, and that is that Michigan small business owners are at a tipping point here. So some of the highlights, well, we'll call them highlights because that's what we're pointing out in the survey. I don't think they're really highlights for small business owners. But 93% of respondents are experiencing increased costs at rates higher than normal. So that's 93% of respondents. The number one concern among our members is inflation, which is what the number one concern was in the spring as well. And then that's followed by the availability of labor. So obviously talent retention is still a huge issue for small businesses. But most report that they are offering higher wages, increased benefits, and flexibility so that they can compete for that top talent. And I think, Kelly, this is interesting because we've continued these discussions on how the paid leave mandate and increase minimum wage will impact our members. But they're already offering these flexibility initiatives. In fact, 79% offer flexible time off. So this could be limited to a more narrow sick leave benefit if we cannot get the legislature to take action. So just kind of some interesting dynamics happening there. But what's kind of concerning and what we're really looking at here is this overall drop in optimism. Coming out of the pandemic, we have started to see our optimism climb. And unfortunately, there was a 13-point drop in our short-term outlook from February 24 till this survey, and a 12-point drop in long-term compared to 6 months ago. So some really telling statistics from our members in terms of how they're feeling. And so, I put the press release in the chat, but Brian obviously included a quote in it, and I'm going to read part of it. And it says, small businesses simply will not be able to sustain further increased costs. The cliff is in sight, and in February, they'll start to fall over it. So, not to be sounding the alarm bells too much here, but I think look, we have to take action. There has to be something done, or we really will start to see small businesses suffer more. So again, we're not highlights, but those were the main points from the survey. We did release the press release today. You could probably tune in to some radio tomorrow morning to hear Brian talk about it in more detail. Some things we haven't really reported on yet include some interesting takes on artificial intelligence. And so look for more details to kind of be rolled out here soon. But thank you to everybody who participated in our survey. And we appreciate the insight. It really does lead the work that we do here at SBAM. Kelly, obviously, and particularly what you and Brian and Jacob do for advocacy. So again, thanks to everybody who participated. All right, so Kelly, I'm going to pitch it back to you. And this is a report on our final topic today, which is the July jobless rate released by DTMB.
Yes, and let me just piggyback on what you said. Cannot be more thankful for the honesty and filling out that survey as we head towards February and trying to find a legislative fix on a lot of this earned sick time stuff, and also the minimum wage and tip credit. This feedback that we can give to legislators is vitally important. And so we could not thank you enough as you navigate your business in, what we'll call troubled waters at the moment. But it does, to your point, Sarah, lead nicely into this conversation on the Department of Technology management and budget always releases the job rate increases or losses. And so for July, Michigan's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate advanced by 3/10 of a percentage point over the month to 4.4% during July. And then that was reduced by 6,000 over the month, while unemployment increased by 16,000, resulting in a labor force gain of 10,000 for July. And so we are starting to see people essentially, through attrition or cutting back, are not hiring, or people are choosing to leave the workforce and go on unemployment. So the uptick in Michigan's jobless rate reflected an increase in both unemployment and the total workforce during July, and the industry employment was mixed over the month, which resulted in a slight decline in payroll jobs. And so the national unemployment rate rose by 2 percentage points over the month to 4.3%. Michigan's jobless rate was 1/10 of a percentage point larger than the US rate. So now we're higher than the US rate. Over the year, the national unemployment rate rose by 0.8 percentage points, while the statewide rate increased to 0.6 percent points since July of 2023. So a couple high level talking points. July was the second consecutive month with a statewide increase to unemployment. Total unemployment in the state rose by 7.8% over the month, while the national unemployment level advanced to 5.2%. Michigan's over the year workforce gain of 0.7% was similar to the labor force gain seen nationally between July 2023 and July 2024 of 0.8%. For regional purposes, the Detroit, Warren, Dearborn metropolitan statistical area seasonally adjusted unemployment rate rose by 0.4 percentage points to 4.5% in July, and employment in the region was reduced by 8,000 over the month. So while unemployment advanced by 10,000, the Detroit metro area labor force remained unchanged since June 2024. So Michigan's seasonally adjusted non-farm payroll jobs fell by 2,000 between June and July, resulting in a total job count of 4.4 million. And so the sectors that did see some increase in employment: private education and health services. And I'll just end with the number one being construction, which we all know there's plenty of construction jobs out on the highways, as it now takes me an hour and a half to get home. But I appreciate the work they do. So we'll just leave on that note.
All right. Well, Kelly, thanks for joining me today. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you have a great week, and we'll be back here next Monday at 3 p.m.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everybody, and have a great week. If you need us, you know how to find us. Please call SBAM and we will help navigate whatever you need.